Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. S. Padmavati oration for this year stands cancelled as Dr. Ramesh Babu from Hyderabad hasn't been able to make it due to some last-minute exigencies. We move on to Dr. Andres Grunzik memorial oration. This year, this oration is being conferred on Professor N.N. Khanna. And may I invite Professor Hanumant Reddy, and he'll be joined by Dr. P.P. Mohanan, along with Dr. Gautam Datta. And I would request the august presence of Doctors D. Dash, Atul Jain, Neeraj Gupta, V.G. Nadgowda, if they are available on the chair. Professor Khanna this morning for the next 20 minutes would be deliberating on the journey of interventional cardiology from kitchen table to catheter-based genetic interventions. As you're well aware, he is the senior consultant interventional cardiology, and in vascular interventions, he also is the coordinator for vascular services at the Indraprastha Apollo Hospitals in New Delhi. Professor Khanna, may I request the chairpersons to kindly don him with the citation and the medallion, and then we'll get going with the proceedings. Professor Khanna, please.
Incidentally, Dr. Narendra Khanna is going to adorn the chairmanship of the National Interventional Council. Over to you, Dr. Narendra.
Thank you, chairpersons. A part of my talk has already been given by Dr. Reddy, but anyway, I'm going to just stick on to interventional cardiology, the journey of interventional cardiology, which started from the kitchen table of Dr. Andreas Grunzik and is now heading towards genetic and robotic and nanotechnologies. Now, if you see, most of the father figures for interventional cardiology were actually radiologists, right from Dr. Forsman to Dr. Sohns to Dr. Judkins and then Andreas Grunzik. They're all radiologists who actually discovered a technique passed on to the cardiologist, and that's where the cardiologists had adapted and modified and sort of refined these techniques and moved ahead. And I'm sure this was the dream of Dr. Andreas Grunzik, who really died young, but he was the most powerful brain after Albert Einstein in this century. His dream was that the catheter-based percutaneous treatment of vascular diseases, not only coronaries, was possible and amenable in a daycare setting in adult and awake patients, and that's where we are heading right now. So just to give you a little brief history, cardiac catheterization was first done in an animal by Hales, and it was reported as long as 200 years back, more than 200 years back in 1711 by Hales. But the actual progress came when Dr. Frostman actually passed on a urinary catheter to measure his central vein pressure, and for which he was fired. And later on, 30 years later, he was rewarded with a Nobel Prize, and that's not unusual. Then Dr. Mason Sohns, who actually sat under the table to actually do angiograms, and this was the first angiogram done of the right coronary artery. And this technique was modified by another radiologist, Dr. Judkins, who was a student. And then Andreas Grunzik, who learned from these two masters, actually started and thought, why not? We can go not only to diagnose coronary artery disease, but we can actually go and treat and open these blocks. And that was his dream, and that's where the interventional cardiology started. And it's not far away. It's only less than 40 years ago that Andreas Grunzik in 1977 actually reported the first case of coronary angioplasty in humans. And that's after that there has been an explosion of interventions and innovations in coronary tree, and then further on into various other vasculatures. And I'm going to take you through this journey where we stand today. Now, this is Dr. Andreas Grunzik, and that's his famous kitchen table and the kitchen knife. He used to actually make catheters and stitch balloons on the catheters and use these catheters for coronary artery dilatations. And this was his small C-arm cath lab. And this was the first LED angioplasty which was done. And incidentally, even 30 years later, without a stent, the patient has remained well and the angioplasty, there was no restenosis in this lesion. And in 1976, he reported his concept in the first animal experiment in the American Heart Association meeting in November 1976. And a year later, he did the first balloon angioplasty in a human being. Thereon, there have been a lot of milestones in interventions. There have been interventions, there have been the discovery of stents, regulating balloons, and further on, which I'm going to just take you through. But after Dr. Andreas Grundzig actually did the first balloon angioplasty, a lot of people actually learned this and started replicating. But what was very common with all of them was there was a frequent dissection and recoil, and there were poor angiographic results and also late results. And often there was a need of surgical backup, and the surgeons would always come and help them out. So this wasn't a great procedure. There was a sort of search for better procedures to take away the plaque. The lasers came in being, and they then fell off sort of common use. The atherectomy devices like rotational atherectomy and also the directional coronary atherectomy, they also were used, but the results were still not good, because what was seen, although the acute results were better than simple balloon angioplasty, there was always a very high risk of restenosis and recoil. And that's when another radiologist came into picture. He was Dr. Palmas, Julio Palmas, who actually made a metallic scaffold which could be sort of crimped on a balloon and put in the coronary arteries. And this was first done by Dr. Palmas and Dr. Ulrich Sigwarz and Jacques Paul, and this was in 1987. So from 77 to 87, we had an era of balloon angioplasty with poor results, but good concept. And from 87 onwards, we had the first stents available for coronary stenosis. And there were two big trials, the BENISTENT 1 trial and the STRESS 1 and 2 trials, which clearly proved that the stents were much better and provided a stable solution to coronary angioplasty done by balloon itself. And there were 6 trials in all, and after 6 agonizing years of clinical studies, the FDA approved metallic stents, bare metal stents for coronary artery stenosis as a treatment which was an alternative to a bypass surgery. And after that, there was a revolution from 98 to onwards. Every lesion was just stented, and there was just an era of just see a lesion and stented, and this became very popular. And millions of patients had coronary stents. But there were some good sides and bad and ugly sides about the stents. The good was that you didn't require a surgeon. Mostly you could get away with good results. But there was a bad side was that, and the ugly side was sometimes you ended up with a focal or a diffuse restenosis, and this required multiple balloon dilatations or restenting, and this became a disease in itself. So this was a disease which you gave to the patient after getting good acute results. Then there was research, it was known that it was because of neointimal proliferation, and there was studies going in the direction that how can we limit this neointimal proliferation, and the first drug-eluting stent came in the picture, and this was the first drug-eluting stent was implanted by Dr. Sousa from South America, and this he reported and this in Circulation in 2001. Initially, we had first generation drug-eluting stents, which was Cypher in Texas, and they were then used in most of the patients, and the results were really good. They prevented the 6 months agony of restenosis, and in the mid 2000, between 2001 to 2006, the drug-eluting stents, the first generation, of course, became very popular all over the world and actually became a gold standard. Almost challenged coronary artery bypass surgery till a problem started appearing, and this was the problem of late stent thrombosis. The stents did very well in terms of prevention of restenosis, but in 2006, in the European Society of Cardiology meeting, there was a lot of discussion and debate about the late stent thrombosis in these drug-eluting stents. And then that's where the problem came in, and we became more realistic. There were better designs of the stents which were made. There were better ways of delivering the stents. There was more use of intravascular ultrasound and high pressure dilatation of the stents. There were better pharmacological means which were available to prevent restenosis and acute stent thrombosis. But that's where we stand from 2006 to up till now. Now we have better scaffolds, which I'm going to discuss later on. So that was up till 2008 to 2010, we were in an era that we had a good drug-eluting stents, we had different generations of drug-eluting stents, and we were doing great procedures, clearly outbeating the surgery, and as a result, all over the world, the surgery fell by 300% and angioplasty grew by 300%. So this was, and more interventional cardiologists started using these techniques. Then what was next? This was very good. We actually competed with surgeons and got a better result in terms of treating coronary artery disease. But what we also saw that as cardiologists, we acquired very good interventional skills, wiring skills, understanding the vascular anatomy, and also we understood that atherosclerosis is actually a diffuse disease and involves multiple beds. And so what lied ahead of us was to treat vasculatures and stenotic lesions all across the body and to treat more and more complex lesions. So the approach came to approach from simple angioplasties to CHIP, which is complex, high risk and indicated patients, and more patients of left main, CTOs, diffuse disease, complex anatomies, calcified lesions, bifurcations were started. They were being used, these lesions were being treated by the currently available devices of rotablation, stents, bifurcation stenting, left main stenting, and lot of data came and clearly proved that this is possible in these sort of lesions and actually outbeat surgery in most of the selected patients. Also in parallel, what developed was the optimal pharmacotherapy, both in terms of anticoagulation and antiplatelet agents. And the trials revealed that if you blended good pharmacological adjunctive therapy with good procedure by putting in stents and the latest drug-eluting stent, you can actually have very stable long-term good results. And now we have better stents available. They are bioabsorbable scaffolds, and these are a different variety of stents, and these are a different concept of stents where not only a scaffolding is there, but also there is a vasomotion of the artery which is retained, and also it involves healing of the vessel. The concept changed from dilating a stenosis and preventing a recoil and restenosis to actually healing the lesion, and that's where we are. We had the ABSORB trial which showed very good results in terms of preventing restenosis and preventing stent thrombosis, and also maintaining these results for 2 years, and when then the stent actually disappeared from the body, was absorbed. So we had a native artery which could be bypassed and which had a normal vasomotion. That's where we stand today, but there are many more scaffolds which are of similar variety, which are bioabsorbable, which are being developed and tested in the market, and soon we'll have at least 20 varieties of bioabsorbable scaffolds. Then we started using the same techniques in different vasculatures. This is for carotids, especially the carotids and neurointerventions. The carotid stenosis today, the gold standard, clearly proven with randomized trials, very big trials, is that carotid stenting is better than carotid endarterectomy, which was one of the best surgery in terms of results with the vascular surgeons, and we can actually do it with proximal protection, distal protection. This is our series of 288 patients, and if you see, there has been no case of stent restenosis, displacement or deformity, and out of the 183 patients, only 3 had minor strokes or TIAs which recovered. The second area where this is working and this could be used is chronic cerebrospinal venous insufficiency, which leads to multiple sclerosis. And there, as we know, there is no treatment of multiple sclerosis. And there was an Italian neurosurgeon, Dr. Zambogni, who actually figured out that in most of these cases there was a stenosis in the outflow of blood in the venous, in the internal jugular veins and azygous veins in the brain, and this led to stagnation of the blood in the brain, and this led to release of hemosiderin, which led to multiple sclerosis. And in some way, if we can actually treat and obliterate this outflow stenosis by stents or balloon angioplasty, we can actually prevent the progression of multiple sclerosis and sometimes even cure these patients. And this is another thing which is now known as a miracle therapy, which is under trial. There have been sort of a diversified opinion upon this, but this is another way, another area where interventional cardiology has progressed. The other thing is erectile dysfunction. More than 25 million men in United States above the age of 50 years do have varying degrees of erectile dysfunction, and many of these would have stenosis in the internal pudendal artery. And this sort of stenosis can be easily treated in selected patients after they fail Viagra therapy with internal pudendal artery stenting. And this was clearly shown in the Zen trial, which is now discontinued in United States and has come to India and also Singapore. We are the primary investigators for this. This is our personal series outside the extended Zen trial, 43 patients, and if you can see, the clinical success was seen in 42 out of these 43 selected patients. Also, the vascular coronary interventionalists have now transformed themselves into vascular interventionalists by acquiring skills of vascular surgeons and interventional radiologists. We treat patients with which all the patients with surgeons, vascular surgeons treat, like SFA stenosis. We do, instead of thrombectomy, we do percutaneous thrombectomies or thrombolysis. We can treat chronic total occlusions of superficial femoral arteries. We can treat popliteal artery aneurysms, below knee lesions and with below knee angioplasties, Leydig syndrome, uterine artery fibroids, you name it, and everything is done by the cardiologists who have acquired the skills of vascular surgeons and interventional radiologists. Even patients who have no other option than are destined to go for amputation, you can still try autologous stem cell therapy. And this is some of our own patients which have actually healed after autologous stem cell therapy with a definite increase in TCPO2 at the wound level. This is again my own patients, typical patient which we get now of dissecting thoracic aortic aneurysm, right renal artery stenosis, and LAD stenosis, came with unstable angina and acute dissection. This is all the scars which we have on the groin with groin exposure. This is the cath lab setup. We stented the LAD, right renal artery, and put in 2 stents, stent grafts to the arch of aorta and also to the descending thoracic aorta. We can treat now complex anatomies with hybrid procedures of aortic dissections and aneurysms. And now with the multi-layered flow modulator, we can actually treat any aneurysm anywhere across any vessel without even doing a hybrid procedure. This is our surgical result, our endovascular result of 289 patients, some of which also required hybrid and chimney. And if you can see, we have a follow-up of 2 years with a very low rate of endoleak. We have also gone to venous side of intervention. These are our patients' pre and post results of daycare endovenous laser therapy for varicose veins. This is one of the very rewarding therapies which the cardiologists have now taken up as a outdoor vein clinic practice. It's very simple, and we have the largest series now in the world. We started almost 14 years back in India. About 8,018 patients which we have followed up in the last 11 years. This is data from 1999 to 2010. And most of the patients had GSV and SSV reflux, but many of them also had a perforator reflux, and we treated both of them. And if you see at 12 months in the patients which we had in follow-up, there was a 94% occlusion rate of this varicose veins. So this is a very good treatment which we do as a out care procedure, and also for both for cosmetic reasons and also for venous ulcers and leg pain. Then there has been a great revolution on the structural side. You see, this is the data from the worldwide market. There has been about 30% growth in interventional cardiology, and this growth has primarily come from the structural heart interventions. The first in-man study for percutaneous aortic valve implantation was done by Dr. Alan Kriebier, who is like, I would rate him as the next Andreas Brunzig, because he is the one who actually revolutionized structural heart disease therapy. This has been proved in more than 8,494 patients in the PATRA trial with all the 3 types of prosthesis, both with Edward Sapien valves, Edward Sapien XT valves, and Edward Sapien 3 valves. This has been published, and the results have been published from October 2010 to 2012 in different subsets in the New England Journal of Medicine. And as of today, this has got an FDA approval, and it is a new standard of care for patients with aortic stenosis who are high risk for aortic valve replacement. Parallelly, there has been another valve which has been tested extensively, This is the core valve, which is the self-expanding valve for the aortic stenosis and regurgitation. What is seen is the valve area achieved are more than as compared to surgery, and the gradients are much lower as compared to surgery. So now the concept is shifting from only treating high-risk patients to almost treating everyone with aortic stenosis, even with moderate risk, with a percutaneous aortic valve. Similarly, mitral regurgitation has been treated and is being treated by E-valves or by coronary sinus annuloplasty. And patients of atrial fibrillations where anticoagulation is contraindicated, they can actually have the LA appendage occlusion, and this device is getting an FDA approval very soon, where we can actually plug the left atrial appendage and the thrombus so that these patients would be prevented from future strokes. There has been a huge revolution in terms of heart failure devices. Impella is one of them, and then we have implantable sensors which can actually give us telemedicine, through a telemedicine. They can give the physician as well as the patient an alarm that we can modify the therapy and decrease the hospitalization. The dilated left ventricle can actually be sort of reduced by percutaneous ventricular restoration devices. We can also put in micro LVADs now percutaneously instead of a surgical procedure, and this is again a thing which is undergoing FDA trial and should soon be available. I'll just finish in 1 minute. There have been future directions also in diagnostics and therapeutics, and what is seen, most of the interventions, coronary interventions, are now done with physiology guidance through an FFR. And in the FAME study, it was seen that if FFR guided interventions had lower MACE rates as compared to an angiographic directed intervention. Also, what is seen is the FFRs can now be reliably obtained from the CT scan non-invasively. And there is a huge revolution in terms of image integration, where the non-invasive images from the transesophageal echo or a CT or an MR, cardiac MR, can be sort of fused with the images in the cath lab, and you can have an image integration and the physiology guidance in the cath lab. And this is how the modern day cath labs would look, that you have a 3D mapping, you have a CT all on the display, you have holographic images. This is actually first in man holographic image of an ostium secundum ASD, and it would be very easy to actually treat these lesions percutaneously and very accurately. The learning curve would be very, very less. Also, what Dr. Reddy told you, the device industry and also the IT industry is moving ahead, and you will have soon watch-like devices not only for fitness but also for chronic disease management and heart failure and arrhythmia management. And many of the procedures now would be done by robots, and this is to reduce the radiation to the operator, and also this will be actually leading to much more precise procedures if you do it through the robots from outside the cath lab. And it's not it's not a fantasy, but more than 10 labs in United States are already using robotics for coronary and peripheral interventions. The other therapy where the intervention has gone is renal artery denervation. It actually started with a lot of hype and hope, but the Simplicity 3 trial actually made it from simplicity to complexity, and we are not sure whether it's going to help. But there were many pitfalls of Simplicity trial, and now we are actually, there is another trial which is going on with better catheters, and most likely conceptually this should work. There's also what is going to happen is there are devices for pulmonary artery denervation in chronic pulmonary hypertension, where the hypertension cannot be controlled by drugs. This is another way we can treat these patients of pulmonary hypertension. And the last genetic interventions would be on the concept of epigenetics, which is a branch of genetics where we can actually regulate the gene expression. We can turn on the genes, we can turn off the genes, and at a local site, and this can be done through a catheter, and also through a catheter we can go and do cell therapy. These are the various trials which were used for cell therapy in ischemic heart disease in the last 10 years. And they can actually, the cells can be taken out from skeletal myoblast or from the bone marrow of the patient. And then these are actually they are amplified through colony stimulating factor, and then after that they are injected percutaneously with an angioplasty catheter or an angiography catheter into the diseased myocardium. And there have been many trials in the MAGIC series from MAGIC 1 to 2, 3 and 4, and the last one is the MAGIC 5 trial, which is very promising, and what it has shown that there is a definite improvement in the myocardial regeneration if given in acute MI setting and not in an old MI setting. So if you have a patient of acute MI, not only that we use pharmacoinvasive strategy or primary PTCA, but if we can inject the autologous stem cells right then, there are high chances that we are going to recover the myocardium. And this is one of the cardiac MRI which you can see from at baseline and at 6 months with acute primary angioplasty followed by intracoronary injections of stem cells. You can actually see that there has been improvement in the anteroapical LAD territory hypokinesis, and there has been a muscle regeneration. So this is where the interventional cardiology has moved from the kitchen table, which Andreas Gundrich started in 1977 to 2015, and I am sure his dream of catheter-based percutaneous vascular treatment for all the vascular diseases is coming to a reality. What he would also be very happy with, that now once we have achieved great results for any patients, we can give hopes to the patient, we can treat patients. The attendants are quite happy that, but when it comes to billing, these devices are very costly. They would have a second heart attack. That's where we need, the next direction should be to reduce and indigenize these sort of devices, and how we can get the costs down and we can provide this technology to each and every patient. Thank you very much.
That's kind of excellent, very elegant, very comprehensive and thorough presentation. We enjoyed it very much. And now actually for Indian setting, for heart failure patients, you have a mini VAD or a permanently implantable mini VAD available. Heart transplantation is not the best option for Indian patients.
For Indian patients, the mini VADs are not available. We have the conventional LVADs. The conventional LVADs cost about ₹1 crore in India, so they are not a reality in the sense that there have been few centers who are doing it, but I don't think more than 50 LVADs have been done in the country. Similarly, for heart transplantation, it started long back, but in the last 15 to 18 years, the heart transplant has not picked up because of, mostly because of cultural problem that there are no donors. So in India, there are different problems, both financial and cultural. That's why we are far behind in terms of Western world.
Okay.
It's interesting, till 1977, we cardiologists has been mainly making diagnosis and medical treatment. And the gentleman, Andrea Roland Glunzig, comes and then opens up a huge space that the cardiology has now reached to a state that
it's gone beyond cardiology to vascular surgery, pulmonology, gastroenterology, obstetrics, everywhere.
Okay. Yeah.
So is pulmonary denervation being done in our country for pulmonary hypertension?
No, it's still investigational. It's on the protocol in the United States only.
So, good afternoon. I am Dr. P. N. Tiwari, a medical legal advocate on behalf of Government of India. I just wanted to know that you have recently discussed about the stem cell therapy. And this therapy is particularly not recognized by MCI under this schedule. And no medical fraternity members are insured for this therapy. Any damages occur to the patient, and what is the scenario? And whether it is still under process, as Western countries have already recognized it, but what is the stage in India? Because many doctors are using this therapy in various diseases like Alzheimer's, chronic non-healing ulcers, and even you have stated right now. So what is the fate of this stem cell therapy in India?
Okay, so that's very interesting because I do both coronary and vascular. We started doing vascular stem cell therapy for acute chronic critical limb ischemia for impending amputation, and this was allowed till about 4 years back when the ICMR and MCI stopped it completely because they say, again, the reasons are same, the doctors are not insured, the institutions are not insured, and we have been fighting on a case-to-case basis and on a protocol basis that the patient is going to lose his limb anyway, and it is his own cell which we are implanting, and that's the best chance he has. But as of now, it stopped completely because of the MCI ruling. And it's very unfortunate that, I have a young patient, 30 years old, who lost one limb with Burgess and again lost the other limb with amputation because the stem cell was not right. But the initial results were good and encouraging in some patients. In US, the stem cell therapy for autologous stem cell therapy for a critical limb ischemia is almost getting approval from FDA. It's not approved still, but on compassionate ground it's approved, on a protocol basis it is approved, and it is nearly getting approved as a standard care for end-stage critical limb ischemia where amputation is the only answer. In terms of cardiac stem cell therapy, in India also we started with few cases about a decade earlier, but there are two problems. If we use stem cells, there is a cardiac regeneration, but these cardiomyocytes do not electrically couple with the normal left ventricular myocytes. And there has been incidences of ventricular tachycardia and fibrillation and death, so there has been a need to implant defibrillators, implantable defibrillators. And in US also this gene therapy and stem cell therapy actually started in a big way, and then under a protocol, and again it stopped because of two reasons. One is this, and the second is there was some, when it was not autologous, there was some risk or maybe a potential risk of teratogenicity or carcinogenesis, so it stopped. So US also, it's not a standard of care as of now, it's again investigational, and India it's again stopped. So,
Okay.
but this is being done in Europe, and Europe it is a standard of care in some centers under protocol.
Thank you
And
very much.
the study which I showed and the MRs which I showed, this is from Korea, and in Korea this is a standard of care, and they have done huge number of trials on this, and they have the biggest experience in the world.
Thank you very much, Professor Khanna. We'd like to thank all the chairpersons for being kind enough to chair the proceedings. Heartiest congratulations once again.